You're listening to the Reality of It All podcast, candid conversations about today's hot topics. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. We're covering a really important topic today, and that is about toxic mold. And, most of the time, or a lot of the time, we don't even realize this is in our homes, and this is what's making us sick, or making our family sick. So joining me today is an expert, Kealy Severson, and she is going to help us learn about the ins and outs of mold and toxicity. So Kealy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, how did you get into the mold business?
So I was already a healthcare provider. I was already a licensed acupuncturist and herbalist. And ironically, I wasn't given any mold education in all of my medical school. What happened was I moved into a moldy apartment I didn't know had mold. There was a hidden mildew smell. There was an occasional dishwasher leak. I didn't correlate either of these things with the knowledge that I should assume that mold would be hiding because of these things. Just wasn't on my radar. As myself and my family continued to decline in health after moving into this place, years later, we eventually found it. And my first thought was, could this be what's making me sick? And because I had never heard of mold illness, my next thought was, don't be paranoid. I began realizing that it absolutely was part of my illness because we moved immediately and all of us began to recover. At this point, I began to screen my acupuncture clinic base to see how many of them were exposed to mold or water damage. And when I started screening my clinic population to see if they were exposed to either visible mold or living or working in a water damaged building, I noticed 100% of them confirmed. And that's when I started to put together how varied the health complications from mold exposure can really be. And when I say varied, I mean this illness can manifest as any autoimmune illness, any immune dysfunction. If you're a Lyme disease patient or have co-infections, you will think that that's the only issue because of the way that this suppresses the immune system. It's like, if you want to talk, go in your room, okay? The way that toxic mold suppresses the immune system, it's really hidden as a known cause. So every other bug or recurrent infection is what gets the blame.
Wow. So, I have seen, shows and stuff where they uncover this mold, and it's just, especially like on, I used to love to watch hoarders. And so when they clean out after a hoard and they'd expose the walls and the floor, they would find just, a nightmare of mold. And, I think people just don't realize how that actually can make you so sick. And there's different kinds of mold, right? It's not just always black mold.
There are many different species of mold. Stachybotrys is of particular interest to me because it's radiomimetic, which means it behaves like radiation. A lot of people who have been injured by Stachybotrys end up with EMF sensitivity. And because these people don't understand that Stachybotrys has radiomimetic properties, they often just think that they have EMF sensitivities. But every EMF case that I've ever looked at, they have a history of water damage. So it seems as if the properties of mold might be becoming increasingly toxic as a response to it using human pollution as a food source. And so that's something that we really need to take interest in because the Aspergillus and other molds of the day weren't dropping people left and right. If this was a completely known issue since biblical times, doctors would know about toxic mold illness. You wouldn't have to find a special healthcare provider to treat you.
What do you mean by EMF?
Electromagnetic frequencies.
Okay. So you to your cell phone, TV, that kind of thing.
Right. A lot of people are reporting, and it's increasing, that they're having a neurological or some type of reaction to computer usage, phone usage, technology usage, their Wi-Fi being on. And because the properties of Stachybotrys aren't well understood, they tend to just point at the technology and saying, this is the problem. And it might go a little bit deeper, and it might be they've been sensitized by a toxic mold like Stachybotrys that has radiomimetic properties that behaves like radiation. They've already been sensitized to something that emits some radiation.
Okay. So how do we know? How can somebody know if what is going on with them is mold or not if they haven't discovered the mold?
That's a really great question, because there are a lot of shortcomings in testing that make it hard to identify the problem. But what I always say to people is, if you know that you've had any type of water intrusion, let's say your upstairs bathroom leaked and you stopped the leak and that was how it was fixed, but it leaked for 3 days. Or the example of water coming into someone's basement and they dried it within a couple of days. People don't associate these occurrences with hidden mold growth, and they absolutely should. So the first thing is, if you've had a water intrusion event and something is off with your health, meaning anything, low energy, not feeling like yourself, depression, anxiety, advanced stages are going to be digestion issues or serious problems with your immune system or autoimmune illnesses, you should assume that your environment has something to do with it. And if you want to test that theory, getting away somewhere without bringing really belongings from your house, but just getting to a different location for a couple days in really fresh air and seeing how you feel can tell you if your house or work is making you sick. The hallmark of sick building syndrome, which is synonymous with toxic mold exposure, is that you feel better out of the building. So this pairs with teachers in moldy schools. They feel better during the summer or the weekends. People in bad houses, they might go camping with their families and feel great, and all of their symptoms subside, and they just don't know why when they come home, they feel crappy again. They begin to associate it with, oh, well, I was on vacation and I was camping and I was healthy. So trusting your own body is key here, very key here. And understanding what environment can do to your body is key here, because there are failures in mold testing. Some types of mold, like Stachybotrys, are such a heavy, dense spore that if you just call the random air testing guy down the street and have him come to see if you have toxic molds, chances are, unless you have an amount that's massive, your tests are going to be all clear. And even if one spore of Stachybotrys comes up, it's indicative of much more hiding somewhere, because as a dense, heavy spore, it's falling to the ground. It's not floating around and readily found with air testing. A lot of people begin to have a false sense of security that it's not mold making them sick when they do testing. And in this way, testing can really work against people. And that's one of the most dangerous parts of this industry, really.
And why do you think it is that, we go to our doctor, we're not feeling good, and, they can't pinpoint it on anything, but they never really think or talk about our environment? Is it just lack of education in the medical field? That's a really good question. I do not think doctors are given adequate information about environmental illness, specifically toxic mold injury. And I do think that there's a few reasons for that. One is that their education really focuses on what can be quantified and what can be treated with a pill. Mm-hmm.
And you can't out-medicate a toxic environment. The other thing is they do have access to things like mold allergy testing. And unfortunately, this is also something that tends to work against people, and I'll explain why. Let's say there's 4 molds in my house. They're all immunosuppressive, meaning they weaken my immune system's ability to function. So my immune system's not fighting them off. My immune system's turned off, and instead I'm getting frequent colds or feeling really run down or some type of recurrent infection. I go to the doctor. I know I have a leak or I know I have mold, and I say, can you test me for mold allergies? All of the tests are negative. Well, why are the tests negative? One reason can be because your immune function has been suppressed. So it doesn't even show that your immune system is fighting these molds. So this is one way that testing can actually work against people. Because the toxic mold phenomenon really emerged in the 80s, and we haven't had sufficient research on the radiomimetic effects of Stachybotrys, on the immunosuppressant effects of some of these molds in the bigger picture, they just don't have the research available to them to say, I know that this is true. Even though if they wanted to look into toxic mold in depth and some of the toxins that it produced, they could find information on those toxins and they could start to put it together. But doctors are so busy. I mean, they're seeing people in 10-minute increments.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about, we've found mold in our house. What do we do?
If you were my mother, I would tell you to probably contract the repairs yourself. A lot of people panic and they contact a mold remediation specialist.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an industry that's not regulated. So any person of any standing, of any education level, of any work history can basically take a weekend training to learn how to remove mold. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of problems with that because there's companies that will come in and they'll do an antimicrobial fogging, or if you're a renter, they might want to spray concrobium or bleach. The bottom line is the mold needs to be taken out of the house. It needs to be found and it needs to be removed. It cannot be killed inside of the house, which is what a lot of these chemicals do. You would contain the area with plastic so that once you start ripping into drywall and insulation, that air doesn't contaminate the rest of your house. So containing it, right. Having an air scrubber in the area that you're working, vented outside. So an air scrubber is a filter that cleans air really quickly. And then having it vented outside, meaning that air that's sucking in is exiting through the window. So it's not recirculating the toxins back in the house, and then literally destructing the house. So ripping out the drywall that was ripping out the insulation, and then replacing those items. Now, these repairs can get really, really complicated if it's in an area, let's say the structure of the house.
Yeah. Yeah. And costly.
That's one reason I recommend that people figure out the safe procedure and to do it and contract it themselves if they can, meaning find a carpenter or a handyman local to you that's willing to work under the contract of saying, I promise this will all be contained. Let's sign a contract of the steps in the order of how this has to happen. Because the really expert mold remediation companies will come in and charge probably 5 times what a local carpenter would. Because it's mold remediation.
Is that covered by homeowners insurance?
Most times it's not. Most times it is not. If there was a water damage event that is covered by your insurance policy, then some repairs might be covered by insurance, and that has happened. Many times your insurance company will cover companies like ServPro, and they will come in and just put fans on it for a few days. And that's that's an issue because if it doesn't dry within the first 24 to 48 hours, mold's going to grow. If you have fans on it for a week, it's already not dried out fast enough.
Right. It's a fungus. It's like growing, you see fungus and stuff out in the woods and in nature, or, mushrooms, stuff like that. And they grow like crazy.
Exactly. Right. So fully removing it and not using a chemical to try to kill it, and removing it safely under plastic containment with an air scrubber vented outside, and then understanding contamination concepts. If you haven't been made extremely sick and this happened recently, you probably don't have to worry a ton about your furniture being contaminated. But if you've been living in a water damaged home for quite a while and your health is shot and your kids are all sick and your marriage is falling apart because everyone has mood disorders from mold rage, you can bet your belongings are contaminated because it's just been in the air quality far too long. And that's a really hard thing for people. I mean, my family has lost everything twice since 2018, and I'm talking homes and possessions, and we're a family of 5.
So you mentioned something called mold rage.
Yeah.
What's that? I mean, it sounds self-explanatory, but
yeah. Well, people tend to get increased anger issues or an inability to handle stress or a massive overwhelm 10 times fold when they are living in a water damaged space. The toxins released from mold are a neurotoxin, and they essentially cause brain damage that changes the personality. In areas like the amygdala that can make us feel more angry when they're activated, show damage.
Something else I want to talk about is, when you find mold, if you're renting a house, you're renting an apartment, and you discover mold damage and the landlord doesn't want to do anything about it other than maybe bleach it and paint over it with some Kealys or something. What do we do? What steps can we take to, make sure that the landlord does what they're supposed to?
This is a really good question, and this is something that I've dealt with a couple times in the past few years. So here are my tips. All communication with landlord is done in writing.
Absolutely.
No phone calls, only text messages and emails, and save the conversation. The majority of the time, if you have a landlord do the test, they are not legally obligated to show you the results. So if you are able to push your landlord to do testing and the tests come back bad, they're probably not going to show you. So I would recommend bringing in your own industrial hygienist to find the areas of water damage and do surface testing. The surface testing of the mold is specific. It's more reliable than air testing to find the surface of it and swab it and send that into a microbiologist. So either an industrial hygienist or a microbiologist. And yes, as a renter, this is an out-of-pocket thing. But this is how you best protect yourself. At that point, you can show your landlord the test results and say, I had somebody come in here. This is what they found. I would like this removed in accordance with all EPA and CDC standards, which says that the mold must be removed. Killing mold is not an effective solution for mold removal. It should not be a substitution. If your landlord insists on using any products to come in and kill the mold, I always defer to the label on the product. If the label says kill mold, or if it doesn't say, and bleach is a disinfectant. It doesn't say anything about killing and removing mold. Most of these products, if they kill mold, they'll say kill mold. None of the products say that they will remove mold from your house forever.
Right.
And so using that specific reference of the EPA and CDC say that it needs to be removed this label says that it doesn't remove it, it just kills it. That is the little area of loophole that you can use against your landlord. There is a pesticide law, that's a federal law, that extends to chemicals. And I'm not a lawyer and this is not legal advice.
Right, absolutely.
But the label law says the product, if you are a renter, a landlord, or any management or maintenance, can only use a pesticide or chemical inside your rental in the manner that dictates on the label.
Right.
So they are in violation of a federal label law if they come in to use a product that kills mold when mold needs to be removed. Now, if you've done all of this successfully, you still don't have a high chance of your landlord making the repairs. They'll probably do a forced eviction on you, which is what happened to me when I proved beyond a doubt that my landlord was unwilling to make the proper repairs. They just gave us a 24-hour notice to move.
Which a 24-hour notice is, if I remember correctly, that's illegal, isn't it? Don't they have to give you 30 days?
He violated our lease by refusing the repairs. So there was a legal contract that was violated. I don't know if it was actually illegal, but he did violate our lease, which the contract said that he would provide a habitable dwelling. And instead of providing a habitable dwelling, he forced us out because he didn't want to complete the repairs.
Right.
In our first rental, I was not equipped with all of this information because that was the first time I had gone through it. And the management team actually came and sprayed a fungicide. And this created a chemical war zone because the mold was fighting for survival and the fungicide was trying to kill the mold. And our symptoms ramped up so severely that we actually fled the apartment with the clothes on our back and left everything behind and never went back.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, Kealy, this has been incredibly informational and educational. So thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today about this. You know, it's something that we don't think about. We don't talk about. You know, you don't think about it unless you actually physically can see the mold. You just don't think about that it could be there. So absolutely. Thank you so much for this. Listeners, I'm going to have all of Kealy's information in the show notes. If you're listening from one of our partner stations, go to therealityofitall.com and pull up her episode, and all of her contact information will be there. She has a lot of great information on her website and also on her podcast about mold and toxicity and all of that. And if you're renting and you're coming up on this with issues with your landlord, definitely contact an attorney and get some legal advice on what you can do, what your rights are, and how you can proceed. So again, Kealy, thank you so much for coming on. This has been fantastic.
Thank you for having me, Tracy.
My pleasure. Listeners, thank you for tuning in. We will talk to you in the next show. That's it for today's show. Thanks for listening. Be sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, and TikTok.